Welcome everybody. My name is Tatu and on the behalf of Robot Framework Foundation as well as Eficode, welcome to the Robot Framework Meetup that is happening live both Helsinki and Tampere.
Hi, my name is Tatu Aalto. I'm the current Selenium 2 library main developer and I work for CRF Health. I was going to talk about Selenium 2 library tips and tricks, but as an architect, I would like to first discuss about the Selenium 2 library architect. And hopefully most of you know that it runs on Python. And then Selenium 2 library is quite a thin wrapper on top of the Selenium, which also runs on top of Python. And then Selenium itself uses few Python standard libraries. It mainly uses the HTTP lib and the sub-process libraries. And what it does with the HTTP lib library is that it has its own protocol defined, which is called JSON wire protocol, which is nowadays coming, was it a ETSI or ITU standard, and that's why we have problems with the fireworks nowadays. But anyway, it has its own standard type of REST type of interface, which it talks to the driver executable, and driver executable means like a Gecko driver in the Firefox, or a Chrome driver, or EA driver, or whatever there is. And then there's the browser, and between the browser there's a vendor-specific implementation, which I don't know how it works, but I know that it works because it clicks the elements and selects stuff from drop-downs and inputs stuff to the field. Then, how does a keyword actually work? Here in this example, we have an input text keyword, which uses an ID with the first name, and it will send a text foo to the browser or to the Selenium. Well, what the Selenium 2 library refers to when you execute that keyword, it finds the elements with the find elements by ID method, and then Selenium returns a list of elements. And the catch here is that Selenium 2 library will silently ignore everything else but the first element. So it takes the first element from the list and starts interacting with that one. And the first thing that it does, it clears the field by the clear method, and then it sends the text full to the input element. And you can actually see this in the Robot Framework log. If you run it with the log level trace set on, and it looks like that. That first post message is defining the element with the ID, then there's the clear, and then in the last there's that sends the value foo, which is on the top of there on the right. That's how it works. So one keyword can be one Selenium 2 call, or it can be many. I think if you exclude all the waiting keywords that may execute one or many Selenium calls, I think the input text is maybe the most complicated call that there actually is. Well, if everything would work nicely, you wouldn't need tips and tricks to handle those kind of things. And these are my 3 common errors that I see. There's that no such element not visible, and then there's the nasty bastard called state element reference exception. As the previous presenter says, he used Chrome, he used Firefox, I then use Firefox. Chrome, first thing set up nicely is that you didn't find the element that you were expecting. In the developers tools, I have only found why to execute XPaths, but they work quite nicely, and you get different kind of list of elements. And now you can see that which selector matches which of the elements. This is usually an easy way to verify that you get a void with the element doesn't exist exception. Use the tools and you get pretty stable test in that way. And then there's that other nasty thing, the middle one, that the element is not visible. When you request interaction with the Selenium 2 library, it finds all the elements in the page that matches your selector. Is it an ID, is it a jQuery, or is it something else? It always gets a list of elements, and silently it will always use the first element. So try to build your selectors in such a way that they are always pointing to their right element. Here's an example that if you select by an ID attribute in the DOM tree, you get full list of elements. That would be same thing as you would call ID equals first name, just without excluding in the quotes, and it would result in the one element. And that's why we can easily verify also that if you use something else than an expert in your selector, and I think you can also execute random jQuery expressions if your web page supports it, if you want to use those kind of jQuery expressions, but use a tool or a method what you feel comfortable or you feel natural to use. In my application, because I have IDs, but I don't always have IDs, I tend to go with expert because there is not always a good way to select them. And then there was that last error, that stale element reference exception, which is usually quite a difficult problem. It usually is a problem that happens randomly. If you run it 5 times, you perhaps get it once, or if you run it 10 times, you get it once. And it's also a problem with the architecture that when Selenium returns your list of elements, it is actually a reference to the DOM tree into an element. And then you perform interactions by using that reference to the element. And stale element reference happens if something changes in the DOM tree after you have found the element, but before you do an interaction with the element. Always. This is the problem. Which was my test name? Here's my test. It uses that simple login page. It waits the username field to appear, and then it tries to input some values and press the save button, and then it waits for that the user is created. Well, basically, without that demo effect, there should have been that stale element reference exception. And I did build my web page in a way that each time I try to input something in the file, it actually takes away that input element and recreates it. And that's why it's quite fast, you don't see it, but that's what it's doing. And therefore, because that original element goes away, and even though new identical elements created, it raises that stale element reference exception. Usually people then, if they have those kind of errors, they go with the wait until the element succeed keywords, which repeats the keyword. In this time it roughly repeats it 5 times and pauses about 1 second to wait. And that solution actually works. It's a really horrible solution. It will make the test really slow. You will have a lot of errors, you will have those screen captures if you don't suppress, and it makes the log file really hard to read, because if you open that wait until the keyword succeeds from the log file, then there's an error, and then there's a succeed. Hopefully there's a succeed, not always, but then it's kind of, oh, why that happened? It's really hard, I don't know what did happen. And it depends. There's multiple solutions on the problem. My solution is this one. This is my library, which is called my input. And it gets the Selenium 2 library instance. And it has a one keyword called my input. And then I get the Selenium 2 library instance with that built-in get library instance with that one. Then from the Selenium 2 library, I get the Selenium 2 library current browser that is open, and I save it to the driver. And then there's this Python thing called Lambda, which is anonymous functions. You can go and dig it up afterwards to training. And basically this part in the line 7 is pure Selenium code. It finds me the element by the ID that I did provide as an input, and I'm only interested about the first element. And then it calls me clear, it calls me send keys also, which is basically the same thing what the input text in the Selenium 2 library is. But with that Lambda, it's quite neat, because each time I want to do something with the element over there. It always retrieves, Selenium will always, with the Python lambda, it will always reduce me a new element automatically out of the Selenium. And then, because each time you perform the new reference to the element is received, all my state element referencing kind of disappeared, which was really cool. I only needed one keyword, just that it does basically the same thing as the Selenium 2 libraries done, except it has that lambda. There are many other solutions, like try expect. You could expect Selenium base errors, was it, that all the Selenium 2 libraries errors. You could perform polling or different kind of ways. But it's a lot of code, perhaps 10-15 lines, that lambda solve it nicely. But it's not the silver bullet for every type of solution. Also, I have some places where that lambda thing doesn't actually work. I have an application which is like Word in size of the application. And my input keyword is actually about 150 lines long, but it's a really cool keyword. It handles all the input fields, it handles all the tape pickers, it handles all the drop-down list, it can input multiple values into the different kind of fields. I don't care about the IDs anymore. I actually select elements by the label that the field or the drop-down or whatever is pointing to, and I use it uploads me all the files that I want. Point is that when you have errors, try to understand why the error happens. It takes quite a long time. It took me 6 months one time to figure out why that test is rendering 2 times out of the 100. And then I took a video on my desktop. I had the console log open and I printed a lot of debug messages. And after catching the error, I understand it. Okay, that element moves 5 millimeters in the page, and therefore I need to do something to overcome that situation. I'm not waiting long enough that the page is fully loaded. And sometimes it's tricky, and sometimes it is easier to handle in the Python code, those kind of exceptions. But you should choose the tool that is suitable for you, and it needs some experimenting. What is the best tool for you? It also depends on the framework that your web application is developed on. It depends how your UI layout may be. But in the end, it may ease your test. It will make the test more stable. It makes the test, writing the test more easier because you don't have to use a different keyword for inputting fields or selecting stuff from the drop-down, or you don't have to use a different keyword to upload the file. It also performs automatic waiting for the element so that the element is actually there, but it's a lot of coding. And I don't know, is it a good idea? Because if you are starting, my application is quite complex and it has somewhat dynamics in it, which makes it sometimes really difficult to handle. And if your application is small, even though it has some Ajax or JavaScript running, it may not be a good idea to you to build your own keywords, but it's a decision that you have to make based on your experience and which way you want to do. The question was that the lambda is just a mean to a way to get to the end, that the point is actually that you always refresh your reference to the element. And lambda is just one way to do it. There's a multiple ways to do it. It is true. For me, lambda is not always the perfect solution. I sometimes have to do something else. And in my code, I wait exceptions and do stuff. And if I know that the element that I do a little bit inspecting when I get the first element, then I ask few attributes that are which kind of element you are. Are you input field, are you a text area, are you drop down, and then I go different places in my code and fetch the element reference in different ways depending on which type are difficult. The most difficult element was the date picker actually, because it opens the date picker and navigating those years and months and stuff is really annoying, so I just write the date in the field. But then in the element and in the application, it wasn't actually reading the date from the field, it was reading what I have selected and always the default value. So I did have to send some JavaScript to actually read the value from the date field. They are, but yes, you're right. It doesn't matter how you get the reference, renew the element, but it is quite handy to use some way that you don't always interact with the same element. That causes quite a lot of errors, and that is the main problem with the Selenium 2 library, that it doesn't reference always the element. Yes, that's why we should not do this in Selenium 2 library. So I think we should do it. It is a question just that we should get the Python 3 support first out. And there is some multi-inheritance madness in the library that we should first refactor out. Selenium 2 library reflects what the Selenium implements. It has that arrangement page should contain, and then it has those waiters, wait until page, blah blah blah. When I write my test cases, I really hate that concept, because if I want to see that something is in the page, I don't want to use 2 keywords, I want to use 1 keyword, verify that page is. And perhaps that is the direction where the Selenium 2 library should go, that it actually would automatically perform your polling, and you should, so that you should not use wait until and then page should contain stuff. At least it makes me to write the test cases more easier, and it solves a lot of errors, because you don't always remember to use the wait until stuff. Yeah, and adding those later is really painful, especially if your application is quite large, like mine. It's a backwards incompatible change. Some community members may not like the change, so now it would be a good time to wait. Who wants automatic polling? Yeah, well, you lose, or we.
Related to the other question, can you tell a bit about the planet name change anyway? Because based on this, it will be renamed to Selenium 3 library, but that's not the case.
Yeah, oh yes, that's in, thanks. Because the Selenium moved to the version from 2 to 3, where should we name it? And should we keep the old Selenium 2 library name? Or should we perhaps choose a new name, totally new, that doesn't have anything to do with Selenium?
Is there a problem why it can't be just Selenium library?
We should do something about the old Selenium library. We should move it to some other repository, rename it, and then release a new library with the version Selenium library 3, and explain it carefully with the user that this is actually the old Selenium 2 library, and if you're looking at the old Selenium library, please go there and don't use this version. And we should somehow still that if you provide some support for the name Selenium 2 library, perhaps just import the Selenium or whatever the new name is. We are thinking a little bit that should the new name be Selenium library, but we are still open for suggestions.
Where is the good place to go take part in this discussion? Is it in GitHub, Slack?
I think
what would you prefer?
It was at least in the Slack, in the Selenium 2 library channels. Oh, we should rename that one too. Darn! Pekka was saying that the old Selenium library, which uses the Selenium 1 or the Selenium RC, doesn't anymore work with the Selenium 3, because Selenium 3 deprecated that Selenium remote control interface, and then we are thinking that perhaps the Selenium library would be a good name. We don't have an issue about it, but I think we should definitely create one where you could vote, and then lots of renaming and lots of moving repositories and lots of this and that. But perhaps we will do first the Python 3 support and get rid of the multi-inheritance madness about the stuff.
So from Tampere, one question. So from my experience, I sometimes get the test stuck when I use this Selenium tests against let's say IE or Edge. So what I can do in the Selenium side? Timeouts doesn't work and stuff.
The best solution, don't test it. Isn't Microsoft stopped supporting EA8 or something? I know it's a pain, it does sometimes get stuck. in the library keyword is sus in mess, and it's somewhere in the so mess that it doesn't anymore respect in the timeout. Perhaps this would be a nice enhancement to the package that actually the timeout would work if the library keyword is somewhere foobar or somewhere dev null. And usually that happens, it's in a CI chart that you come in the morning and wait, okay, execute one test and then it has been stuck for 12 hours. Really nice thing. My test didn't work. My solution seems to be that I make a hard-coded timeout for the CI run, and if it lasts longer than the expected duration of the test, then I just kill the job and do cleanup somehow afterwards. The question was that why not to make the keyword configurable so you could choose will it wait or will it assert. Well, I don't see the point of not waiting. What is the use? But if you're going to, there's no need to be not to wait. If you have that it gets the element and checks that everything is fine, then it doesn't wait anything and it succeeds. But then if there's a small delay, you need to wait. And I don't see the why you would choose not to wait. I'm always surprised where the test actually breaks. When there is a failure about waiting or timeout. I have an application that has two databases and the information is replicated between the databases, and one is like where the transaction goes and one is for the showing what the UI goes. So if I create a user, it goes to the transactional database and immediately it's replicated to the reporting say, so the user is actually visible. And 1 times out of 100 that works in a split of a second. But in one day, somebody was running a lot of, not performance testing, but he wanted to generate a lot of data. So the queue of the replication actually took 5 seconds. So that test broke, and I spent an hour going through the logs, going through the discussing the development, why the heck they're thinking that what is the problem with the database replication, because it used to be instantaneous, that creating user is always visible there. And if I would have polling, I would have not noticed that having a 5-second polling or having a 15 seconds polling is there, and that I would not have to spend time finding that resolving is this a bug or not. At least in my application, there are many times this situation that the test breaks in unexpected conditions and then you just do the asserts. And I'm always amazed. Windows, if you run it in a CI that's a VMware environment or some virtual environment or something, it's a little bit slower. And that you write the test, and there might be some delays. There might be these database issues that sometimes it's not there, and you have to, at least in the large applications, in my experience, you have to do polling in the web topologies surprisingly often. And in my experience, it makes the test more stable. I don't anymore have those kind of, I lied, I still have those because there is still that keywords or function that doesn't use the new keywords, but it still does asserts a lot of time, and I have to do perhaps waiting that the element is not there, but perhaps I would have to refresh the phrase or redo the navigation. And it makes also the writing the test for the user, for the other testers easier, because they don't have to care about those kind of problems that do I have to reload the page if it's not here? Do a for loop in a robot framework? That's awful. And it's much easier to build those kind of functionalities for the testers in your test automation library than make the testers do wait until and then assert something or do interaction something, make them automatic. There are some applications that may not need it. My application is different, and choose the way that works for you. This is not the silver bullet that works for everybody.
So have you done so that you have basically, in this example, do you have like a full library that wraps every Selenium 2 library keyword with Lambda as you saw here, or is it just bits and pieces?
Well, that's good story. When I started, there was no test automation. I have been in CRF Health for 3 years. When I came, I didn't realize how big the applications are, and it's still growing. And I decided that, okay, before that I was working in a smaller company, had a really thin UI, and there was a lot of complex behind the UI. And for there, making everything in the robot framework was nice. But in the one morning, I did wake up and counted all my keywords, all the common keywords. There was about 2,200 keywords. That was awful. And I was hitting, like, if I change this bit here, which is a common keyword, I make that keyword to do a new thing or cover some new scan centers. Then some other test in the some other end breaks because it's using that keyword and it expects that behaves a little bit differently. And building that if-in logic is a difficult thing. And then I started, okay, this doesn't work because the inheritance of the robot framework doesn't just support it, and having all these keywords, users are lost in the forest of the keywords. And then I started to think that perhaps I will do some common stuff that, for example, login, and that does the logging, and everybody start using that logging thing, or create me a user, add roles to the user, and those kind of common type of things that use Selenium quite purely. It uses some of the Selenium DO libraries. Sometimes I use pure Selenium. It depends what kind of problem I'm using. But for example, do logging uses the open browser keyword directly, and I use sometimes it depends on the many things which I use. I choose the best tool for the practice. But then I have that legacy, so I couldn't throw Selenium 2 library away, and I cannot, because it's a big application, I cannot make everything's ready now in a week. It doesn't happen, so I have to gradually migrate, and I want to allow people to do stuff that if they want to verify that something is in the page, some text in the page, and Selenium 2 libraries are excellent for that. Or they want to verify that the elements are in a specific order in some table, the hexpad and Selenium 2 library works very well. So I didn't want the users to be limited what I have built, but instead of everybody writing their create own user keyword, they would use my common stuff. But for the testing part, they may use the Selenium 2 library. Perhaps for the inputting stuff, they use my common work that works in my application. But it's a mixture of the application. But it is the allowing users to choose. And if it's then I have an application. Falemi has also application on mobile phone. There, perhaps I have built keywords that are more like, click me a button, click me an element, and you specify the text in the UI, and then you basically build a script, click, and verify something. And then you have the next text, and click, and stuff. And for that also I have kind of I'm going to the direction that you have a keyword where you can set the application to a specific state. User have to be created separately, then the user have to log in, then the user have to change the default password, and type in the new password. That's a long job which I want to put in the test setup. So I have a keyword that almost does the user creation, but not yet, but actually does the rest of the stuff, the login, re-enters the password if it's needed, change the password to the default one, and then it waits that the user is in his whatever page he's in after his login, and then you can start testing.
So most of these application level keywords are in libraries. So.
Yeah, it's a big application, not everything, but we are going to that direction.
Yeah, okay.
It seems to be feasible. When there's changes, if the UI changes a little bit, if the ID changes, that happens actually quite often, then that I can tweak that change in one place and then all the tests start passing, and you can, it eases test development because sometimes the setup, at least for my older application, is actually quite long. I have to do a lot of database stuff. I have to do this and that, create users, put data in, give special roles to the user and that kind of stuff. And it's long task, and it would be nice that the user can easily do it. And then for the testing part, he may use Selenium 2 library key, or he may use my keywords. He can choose.
Is there a way to handle the operating system windows easily with the library? So,
No.
or is there sort of like a plan to do this kind of library that will make it happen? So this that you can operate the operating system this kind of dialogues easily, I guess.
It's out of scope of Selenium 2 library. It's operating system dialog, and it's really painful, I know. And it's well, because Selenium cannot control it, we are not in the Selenium 2 library, are not going to provide support for that. There are other libraries like Sikuli, Image Horizon, that you can click those elements. That's one way to go. In my application, I have to usually download a lot of stuff and verify that the package contains right stuff and the XMLs are in right format. And yes, I also have PDFs, which we do some verification on it. And then I download with curl. That works quite nicely. There's some it is some work, but it eases the download quite drastically. And then I can just unzip the file somewhere, and then I compare the files that I want, and then it's up to the manual testing. When he actually clicks that button, he selects where it goes, and then that's a one manual test case. Uploading files, thank God we actually have an input field where you can upload, so that works automatically out of the Selenium library. In some cases we have gone to the method that we don't actually download the file at all. In the server there's a backend content management systems, and we actually go and check from there, is the file there, and if it's there, yeah, good, test passed. I try to avoid the downloading as much as possible.
The other way we have solved this is we set up the browsers. This is especially in Firefox, is quite easy to do, so that in the browser settings you set basically that it automatically downloads the file somewhere. And this is where you can actually click the button and let the browser download it automatically somewhere. We usually use the system temp directory or temporary directory for that, and then we go just see that if temp directory has that file or not. So that's another way to do it if you don't want to go the curl vget way. We use that too.
Yeah, I think we have we use some external applications that we have for some things, and for that it was impossible to use the curl, so we went with was it Chrome? Yeah, I think it was Chrome. They defined the Chrome profile, it will download automatically and done. And then the test will automatically fail if the right run with EA or Firefox. And it's not easy thing. The best solution is that don't download files. Think really carefully. If you have to download, then download, and try to find a way that covers 9 out of 10 times, and go with that, and build one keyword for it.
So thank you for the talk, Tatu.
Thank you.
It was really